Father Road. Welcome everybody. My name is Dominic Taylor from Revival Press. Delighted to welcome two of the founding members of the Stony Thursday Book, and they're going to read tonight from their joint book, Slipstreaming, which we had the honour of publishing back in April. Everybody here knows John and knows Jim. They're both stalwarts of the poetry scene in Limerick, and really, I suppose you could say, they kick-started the culture of poetry as a sort of an event, and a weekly event here in Limerick as well. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to the lads, and they're going to take you through the reading. Jim? John?
Okay, John. Tá fáilte River Galéir stopped in it. Hi, Ashley. Just a few brief words before we get into reading from the book. Most of you will know that it happened from a bicycle tour of the west of Ireland. We took off from Limerick and headed up through Clare, Kinvara, Ballywahan.
The Wild Atlantic Way.
The Wild Atlantic Way. We were the original Wild Atlantic Way.
You were.
Wayfarers. And into Connemara and back. And during that journey, we come to this story again, but during that journey, we talked about a lot of issues, a lot of things went down in our heads, and one of them was, in actual fact, that Stony Thursday, but we'll come back to that. This gives you a flavour of what was going on. Now, it has to be said that we kept the journal, but we lost it. And I remember typing with Jim in a caravan in Kilkee, but as the years passed, neither of us knew where the journal went to. Jim always suspected that I had it, which is untrue, and I kind of suspected he had it. But as the years passed, we went our separate ways, we went off and did our different things in life on the journey and that. So we then got back together and we decided we'd come up with Slipstreaming in the west of Ireland. So it's written from the present, looking back as much as we possibly could into the past, into that journey. And so there's a mixture of emotion, theme going on between past, present and a future. There's a little bit of a future in it as well. Anyway, without further ado, either way, is it up or downhill we go? No stopping the loss of air with age, time oxidizing the frame's mechanism that once moved on fulsome tires, sleek and slender like a thoroughbred, eating up the summer road on wheels pedalled as though we had 4 legs and 4 hearts, masters of the saddle, sure of our grip on the handlebars. With my 2-in-1, I now get by, still powered by the spokes in my head, the memory chain intact, and the ability to feel my way in the dark, a blessing. The mind working on tightened valves, despite the frame's malfunctioning. And I know to conquer the hill is to admire the view, delight in and celebrate its descent. And so freewheeling, and I use the Limerick spelling of that. In spite of the load on our backs and our envy of those Germans with their leather pannier bags, we were propelled to fulfill the day's quota of miles, to reach our port of call before nightfall and set up camp on a spare bit of ground outside a village, trace the flames' moonlit detail, fodder for the eye on the road here, a flickering slideshow to transmogrify the journey so far, both aware we might never know freedom like this again, the last of the fire doused, darkness closing in, tomorrow's stage ahead, each to our own shared destination. I'll hand over to Jim now.
My brother Pat said at the launch of Slipstreaming to John that my mother threw the journal out, which did not go down well for me. So, the rocky place. On Corkscrew Hill, clouds coloured like rock descend on us. What can be said about all this rock? We pause at the Bunnabrone portal tomb. Then you cycle on in front of me, become a reconning eye, a dart sailing smoothly over a 325 million year old tropical sea. Leaving the rocky place, I snatch glimpses of you, getting narrower and narrower, bend by bend, in the green of the roadside hazel trees. A true story. John had an absolutely fabulous racing bicycle. Backshore. We take our pick, following spidery legs of roads that lead us to the water's edge. Rumbling rivers reach to, singing and dreaming, hurrying to the sea. It feels like we are truanting all day, searching for a lovely wild place. At these moments, we can do anything. Go barefoot in the water, scramble over beach rock. We can swan watch from the dunes, or listen to oyster catchers wading in the surf. We can talk any kind of talk we want. The way the water strikes the rock or the sand in its simpler world.
And in Searchlight, there were times of despondency when the bicycle chain snapped from too much strain, or the wind caused havoc with our odyssey. Moments when the writing lark seemed like too much hard work, bereft of inspiration, nothing by way of a sign in the pitch dark, to sustain the link with the pen in spite of spectacular scenery, tormented by a raging storm, lake water lashing the moorhen, or tent about to take flight for one of the 12 bends, until a rainbow conjured itself, and through its arc light we passed, sailing the high road in search of our crock of words, a futile pursuit worth the effort for what the slant bestowed.
The 1960s had brought a feeling of optimism that carried into the 70s. We loved it. Naively, we were unaware of what was happening in County Galway at that time. Conversation piece. Pitching our tent in summer and walking to the pub is our simple routine after a half day's cycling west to some place. In Galway, harvesters delight us, surround us in the pub, while 71 kilometres away to the east, young boys playing discover skeletal remains in a concrete structure. Locals think it's a family or a grave. Bless the site, build a shrine, and reseal the pit. Later, we fry mackerel on an old pan. Sunset is slow and pink. It scarcely makes an effort to carry the light away. A blue smoke drifts over the hawthorn to cattle lowing in the next field.
Imaginary pages from a travel log. The Lady of the Strand. I continued from where you left off, using a different coloured pen. The gist of what you had been writing was easy enough to follow. The problem was in the style, the tone, the voice, the actual words. So I sidestepped the clumps of seaweed on the strand and imagined a local beauty out for a morning stroll, coming towards us to ask if we wanted something to eat, a drink perhaps, or even a swim. When I read back what I had written, you took up your own pen and continued. She had come from the sea and had shed the seaweed on the strand from her long mane and was calling us to go with her, to enter the water and dive down into the depths. We could have gone on like this forever, finding harmony, at one with the line of thought, no matter what the colour of pen or syntactical differences, the pulse was the same. Needless to say, we decided to go pubbing instead and toast the Lady of the Strand. Endurance. The gist of what Coogan and O'Hare told us that night in a pub near the schoolhouse on Arn consisted of an oft-repeated mantra to young, aspiring poets who may be uncertain of their calling or the pitfalls that await them. Brace yourselves for rejection, said one. Nothing matters but the words, said the other. And we listened wide-eyed to their advice as the pints and the music flowed, making us giddy and less awkward with our Irish. Filled with moonstruck inspiration, on our way back to the tent, we called on the ghosts of the famine dead to abandon their graves and join us in a merry dance around the schoolhouse field, but no such luck prevailed. Slumped in our sleeping bags, we slept through the morning and were lucky to catch the boat to Rossonville, where a cold wind blew against us as we took the hill to Costello, bound for Screeb, Clonagallera and Malm Cross. Those words of wisdom on Ireland fell by the wayside, with no mood on us for updating the journal that day or the next, until place names began to hum on the page again, and in our heads the advice from those two seasoned men of letters, verified in our belief that we were serving the call. The slog through a summer hail made of us survivors of pitfall and rejection, inextricably tied to our fervent belief that we were living our words in body and soul. Now I wonder what we would say to two young dreamers coming from the cold to sit beside us, their talk of poems in the making, not much to show for aspiration, but enough cop to see in our eyes the results of lived experience.
Halcyon days. We'd made good progress on the road from Kinvara, uncertain what we'd find. We loved the sea and we wanted the sea, but we hadn't reached it yet. We set up camp near a pond beyond a small oak tree in a wild field. At supper time, we rattled off themes from the stories of Mackin and O'Flaherty. You also loved Kavanagh. I loved Yates. I always laughed at how someone had scrawled across my school book, I hates Yates. These were our early Planxty days. We'd seen Easy Rider, but we hadn't read Crane Aquila, nor read O'Flaherty's masterpiece, Famine. Here, on the outskirts of oblivion, we watched frogs jumping into a pond Basho had done this centuries ago on his travels to a far province, and somewhere up around the bend the sea waited for us. We could taste the salt in the wind. Maybe tomorrow or the next day we'd reach the sea and we'd jump in, filling the sound. My way into slipstreaming was through ekphrastic poetry. Ekphrastic poetry is when you write poetry about objects of art. And I wrote this poem after a stone carving in Furbo. The title of the carving became the title of the poem. The future pulses in the stone's heart. That flat stone I skimmed 5 bounces or more, and I swore I'd pluck up the courage to ask you out. Or the stone I dug up in the sizzling heat, that stone I stole from the singing shore. Or the patient, smooth stones, blank-faced, bare, without a letter or a word, somewhere in the future waiting to be chiseled. Or that big stone, dotted with efflorescence, that I climbed on top of to sit down and watch the river flow. Or island stones, flung about of a Sunday afternoon, out of sight of priests and polis, the practice carried off by island men when they gathered on weekend afternoons to fling American stones around in Boston while they yearned for home.
I have to confess, I did eventually get round to reading Cranachil by Martin McLean. And I also then went and read it in English to compare Alan Titley's translation, which is quite good, I thought. Neil, no. A presence. All along the Coshariga coastline, Connemara's chopped an ear. Endurance and resilience in tight clusters of limestone fields, an eerie pattern to the chaos caused by the upheaval of seasonal storm, since that first coastal settler dug in to tame its weather-beaten form. We could feel a presence in the night wind's guttural babblings, ancestral tongues in their infancy, but we couldn't read the landscape with uneducated eyes, content to gaze where we sat enthralled on a grassy breast between Coon Coshle and Unspidal, which locals called Untutconon, Conan Muel's feed of shellfish, who emptied his pockets to shape that fertile shell mound long after the presence of the first Iberian Celt on this Mesolithic sound, dated by Gibbons and O'Cushtola to preserve this hollowed ground. Agus an Dánile, Chumnu, an Dán seo, Derek Lynch, atá an fear sin. Mai hanga. Bhí tú I gcónaí ann domsa, ag fannach leistigh den gcué, ag cur de chuid ama faoi tor, orlána atá tar éis fás, I mullen na móna, I gaiire na hóige, níos faide na ménéis. I gcónaí ann domsa, ag éisteach le húfás, bannacht píosa versáilta, mar an tláinte he seo, mar leiscéil as a dlacha có fada sin con túaáil a ríis, slán agus láidir on my tongue. You were always there for me, waiting within the wind, spending your time in the bush, on an overgrown lane, in the smell of the turf, in the laughter of youth, beyond middle age. Always there for me, listening to horror, a blessing, a piece of verse like this, salvation, an excuse for taking so long to find you again, safe and strong.
This next poem came about after a workshop where the theme was visualization. Two songs were on my mind as I wrote this. The Murder of Maria Martin by Shirley Collins and the Albion Band, and There Was a Murder in the Red Barn by Tom Waits. The Red Barn. Colour splashes everywhere. Against the grey blue sky, clouds like omens shift very slowly over the red barn. Dark hawthorn ditches conceal the gable of the barn. One elderberry in flower stands apart from the hawthorns. Two cypress trees climb high. They shadow the barn doors. A fulvous brush loaded with explosive colours could take aim and pound the canvas. A procrastinating prince might dither between shade and light, too red or not too red. Somehow it all feels like an absence, like a wrist without a pulse. There's no wind. The scene has been without footfall for some time. The red barn looks like flashy courage, or maybe desire, when it pulls hard on the eyes. The roof meets the sky like a returning wave. Darkness will gobble the barn up the way it swallows everything. Once upon a time, one or other stranger found refuge here, perhaps from the storm. Maybe somewhere south of here, the red barn is an imprint in the swallow's dream. All is still, but there is no point in listening for something that isn't here. All the yesterdays are gone. Those two cypress trees remain mute. They were there before the red barn, before the smell of the linseed oiling the timbers, before lovers groaning inside. Those scenes long over, told in shadow and light, hint at a loneliness deeper than an empty church or the silence. Hail starts to fall. It shocks, covering the sand near the sea. It continues over the green fields and sits on stone walls, on hedges, on trees, on farms, outbuildings and towns. It lodges along the spine of the red barn. The cypress trees have known it all before. They are closer to the clouds. They suffer the cold, rooted, tested, steadfast in all seasons. They do not fall apart when some dark shadow slouches towards the red barn. One day, someone will sing about the red barn. A banjo will spike the tune like a hatchet splintering wood.
Jim wrote to me then when we had most of the collection put together and asked me, John, we have nothing about Doolin. And I said, what do you want me to do about it? You know, he said, write something. And I went, okay. So I worked on this small little poem. And the curious thing about the poem was I dedicated it to a poet, Michael Cody. And after the poem was written, I got the news a few weeks later that Michael had passed away. It was strange how that happened. Dueling Voices from Michael Cody. They speak to me still between the notes of concertina, flute, bodhrán and whistle. In the lilting voice of local and visitor, in silent onlookers who have no choice but to keenly listen and watch with relish the evening's gaiety as night closes in on the walk home, where the sea lashes the headland, a house with a single room. And my final little piece is a strange piece in one way, because it does sum up maybe for me the journey we made, but it also refers to lots of other journeys that we've all made on the way. So many journeys impossible to recount, sea and land crossings, river and lake, treks through mountain passages to surmount, villages, towns and cities where people elbowed their way past as I wavered between the throng, a lone traveller unsure of my steps in hostile surroundings, learning not to be wary of the unfamiliar. All those boats and planes, buses and trains, leaving without me, the endless waiting for destination, a snowstorm in my veins, the in-between comforting of strangers, street walking at night in empty Tianjin, lost in the sultry glow of its lantern light, unable to ask for directions to my hotel, the thrill of being inanimate. Greyhound interstates of emotion, and that drive through a redwood tree, no time to skim a pebble on the ocean, or when towed by a woman's feet along the Song Van and lighting a joss stick at the Big Dong Pagoda to cleanse the memory of war amongst the reeds, safekeeping for family and friends. All those odysseys and outings, sallying, sauntering and strolling, vagabondage and voyage, wandering and wayfaring in pursuit of self, trips incomparable to love's companionship reaffirmed, youthful peregrination on a bicycle, scintillas of experience explored in situ, the longest journey of all. Thanks very much.
The title phrase of this poem is from Yeats, and the form is a little of Yeats, Eliot and Ferlinghetti. Beautiful lofty things. Let us go now from turf smell, sound of reels, from a country pub to local accents, a woman and man in the field, noticing the coming and going of seasons, their donkey on the shore drawing dust. Let us watch sea rise above boat, then fall behind us like something we cannot explain, believing in the skipper as waves sound at our heels. Let us arise and go now to a sea mirror polished brightly, to our dying language revived, to our dead revered, where ghosts speak tall tales entertaining eternity, where a dog knowing joy is playful. Hurry up please, it's time, clock is ticking, islands are catching up to the world. Let men in the Christmas cowboy hats, worn now in meadows, hold our hands as we sing the bringing in of hay. Let us arise and go now, for there is more beauty to be found in today's moment than in 100 years of yesterday mornings. Let us throw our words on the pan and watch as they sizzle in the interior of this county. So long, summer showers. Goodbye, Kinvara. A bushel let's go in morning light shining upon the mountainside, past the forest where the tree falls quietly and things are natural, where we do not casually reduce our destiny, but breathe in every moment of this long midsummer's day. Let us arise and go now, and talk together, yourself and myself, under pictures on the mantel in this hostelry, showing up a slice of life on a fine day that confounds cynic, rises above critic. Let us be off over hills after lofty things, roundabout all spiritual and cultural haunts. I'd like to finish now by remembering tonight the late Fred Johnson, who was a tremendous poet and a great friend at the Limerick Writers' Centre. And I'll finish by reading one of Fred's poems. And it's got Connemara in it, which is great. It's called Driving in Silence. All around us, like a black dream with no waking, Connemara under dark rain. Headlights making mute pleas for leniency. Drenched trees shaking, nothing to hear, as if all sound had been exiled. Air rushing through a tired engine. You smiled as the car heated up, then slept snug as a child. Road dipping, folding, turning, rats squeak of wipers, home between the new-built bungalows. Others, like ourselves, evaporate past in a hiss of wet tires. A coastal country, a void among rocks, a poet's wail, a lament for immigration, a need, a love gone stale. All this we hurry from into the merchant's city, or pale. Thank you.
Thanks a million, John and Jim. And I think you've really recreated that journal in Slipstreaming. So it's very well done indeed. Thanks very much. Now, as we already publicised, we're going to have a little chat about the Stony Thursday Book and the early days of it and how it was founded and the origins and that. And before we just talk to the lads, I'd just like to read something myself. My own brother Joe, who passed away there during COVID, was a supporter of the Stony Thursday Book, and he has a poem in the first edition of it, which I'd like to read, if you'd bear with me. It's called Merlin Sings. I turned my face from the world's face because I was a bastard born, and no man might give me name, for no man was I ever born, but for the mystery of the God that dreams upon my solitude, and loved me since I have been child, and brought me to this solitude. In the retreat far in the heart, in this cave I lit a flame, that danced and leaped into my soul, and I burned in the holy flame, and fell the shadow of the God, a pool of shadow down the air, and opened me the magic eye, and gazed upon the dreaming air. The supernatural powers I know, the sorcerer that I am, with every wisdom on my breath, and every breath sings that I am. With the instrument of the God, with a hazel wand in my hand, that I touch against destiny, and Arthur comes by the right hand. I'd just like to bookend that, if I may. Before he passed away, he wrote a poem, his last poem that he wrote 2 weeks before he died, and it's called Where Are You Now? Where are you now? Where are you gone? Your footsteps echo on the path that I now am on. I see fragments of your pilgrimage scattered along the way, the ghostly debris of your life that time has blown away. Where are you now? You once were young, a golden actor on the stage, dying to be sung. But now the silence of your symphony languishes in my ears, the plaintive murmur of your that sadly disappears. Where are you now, my precious one? The trail is cold you left behind, chasing Avalon. Thank you.
Brilliant.
It was big into Merlin and Avalon and things like that. Okay, let's move on. Do you want to come up and tell us the true story of the Stony Thursday Book before Netflix get the rights to it?
My kind of truth. So what I meant by that was, you know, gods make their own importance and all of that. So therefore, the origin, as I mentioned in the beginning, was simply on that journey. We talked about Stony, and then when we got back, and I think that one of the truisms attached to the origin or the beginning was the fact that there was a great group, a lovely group of people in Limerick at the time, Willie English, Claude and Darina Byrne, and they were running the Castle Poets group, and that was powerful, and they encouraged me to get involved in that. But we felt we wanted something probably what we would call then modern, contemporary, different, etc., which is quite natural, and I think that's kind of part of it. Jim may have some other idea here, but Jim.
Yeah, I'd agree with John that the 60s gave a lot of promise, and then when we came into the 70s, we were still carrying that promise. And in fairness to John, he's a really go-getter. When he gets something into his head, he usually sees it through. And we met, as John said, we met extraordinary people. One of them being John's cousin, the very great poet, James Liddy. And James Liddy at the time had a magazine running in Dublin. So who better to give us advice and also to supply us with poems. Like, it was amazing that we went from a very obscure magazine to getting poems from the likes of Paul Durkin, Matthew Sweeney, Seamus Heaney. It was unreal, and there were the two of us driving the car without having learned how to drive.
Yeah, editing their work, like, you know. Sorry, Seamus, but I don't like that comment.
Were there many journals out there apart from the Stony Thursday Book?
There were lots of journals, small journals coming and going, but there were only probably two or three.
Two or three.
Yeah. And now Stony, we're talking about 2024, and it's probably one of the long. I'm not sure. Is Cyphers still going?
Cyphers, it is. Yeah. Okay. Aileen,
Cyphers and ourselves and Stony. I think there's about 3 months in the difference.
Yeah.
It was also founded in '75.
Who was first?
It's a bit of a debate, you know. Did they publish first, or did we? I'm not sure, but somebody needs to do a little bit of research on that and just find out that the actual date. It's probably easy to do, you know. Yeah. Dor, could you get onto your Google there and just... No, I never looked it up, but that's probably the origin of it. That's kind of...
Yeah. Well, everybody's intrigued with the name, so tell us the story of how the name came about.
So that began then, no? We were looking for the name.
Yeah. Well, I recall that we had 3 names. I don't remember the other 2. But I remember the Stony Thursday Book stuck, and it stuck for 2 different reasons. It stuck with John because John had done a bit of research, and he'll tell you about it now in a few minutes. And he had discovered the Stony Thursday in Limerick history. But I must say, for me, I was listening to Bob Dylan at the time, and he had a great song, "Everybody Must Get Stoned." So I thought,
simple as that.
Simple as that, I thought. So we were thinking about the 3 names, and then the Stony Thursday Book stuck.
Yeah.
And Like the interesting thing about the Stony Thursday book is that historically people were throwing something
Stones.
because they wanted to rebel or that.
Yeah.
Whereas John was describing it as we'll write poems and we'll publish poems and it'll be like we'll have our say with the poems. Now, there's a terrific metaphor for the throwing stones. I remember going to a gig in Galway to see Dr. Strangely Strange, and Terry Woods and Gail Woods were with Dr. Strangely Strange at the time, and it was mostly college students from University of Galway were at it, and they were all rolling up little bits of paper, throwing them at the band. And apparently that was what you did back then. If you liked the band, you threw these bits of paper. But John will tell you where the stones
Well,
came from.
I went into the county library on O'Connell Street. It was then on O'Connell Street, and I spoke to the librarian there. And I think she's just recently retired now. I remember Moira. She was then moved to Dooradile. The county moved to Dooradile. Anyway, I went into the O'Connell Street and I asked about sort of a history of Limerick, and she didn't give me Lenihan's, she gave me John Ferrar's, and it was in John Ferrar's history of Limerick that I got the paragraph that hit me there. It was Stony Thursday Corner, and it described the mayor of Limerick at the time, and Alderman Fanning, was asked to sign a treaty. The first siege, I think it was where's the second siege? Correct me if I'm wrong, historians here, but it's probably the second siege. But there was an actual Stony Thursday Corner, and once I was on John Frawley's radio programme, and I was asked this question, the origin of Stony Thursday, and I let loose on the John Ferrar, Stony Thursday Corner, which is on the corner of Broad Street and John Street. Phone started ringing. Yes, we have a call, John, hold it a moment. Yes, who's speaking? I didn't get the name, but I'd like to differ with John Liddy here. This is at 1:30 in the morning. He'd want to check his facts on this, but Stony Thursday Corner was not on the corner of Broad Street and John Street, it was on the corner of whatever, you know. I mean, there are about 4 or 5 corners down there.
Yeah.
And so it was on the other one. And it's where St. John's Hospital is, and the walls of Limerick are running through there. So it was one of those corners. And anyway, the story goes that the people didn't like the proclamation or the treaty, so they all threw stones. And it was never read, apparently. That particular agreement or treaty was never read because the people didn't like it. And I said, this is fantastic. Great name for a magazine.
Yeah.
And that's what it is, you know, and it's still going. Maybe Jim has something to add there.
I remember we got a letter from James Liddy after the first copy came out, and James said it was more a Maundy Thursday. Maundy Thursday coming before Good Friday.
Maundy Thursday.
But the book is dedicated to Michael Curtin, and Michael Curtin printed the first
That's very true.
couple of copies of it, so we have no clue about how you go about getting money to fund a venture like this or that. And Anne Warner was terrific. She came on board and she
did.
tapped a lot
She
of
raised a
small
lot of money.
businesses around town, like the likes of Jack Burke had a place in Thomas Street.
If you look at the first edition, you'll see a list of 20 to 25 businesses. Todd's is mentioned, Canucks, and they all paid £1. So that was £25, which in those days was a lot of money.
How do you get more?
Yeah.
So we proceeded then as we were going on. It entered our minds that we should be prepared. We should have the money in place rather than Michael Curtin said to
Michael.
John, it's curtains for you.
No, I said to Michael, Michael said, I'm not dealing with you anymore, no more. I'm not. And it was it was upstairs when it happened. Eamon was serving, and I arrived in. And Michael was there when the whiskey was from the barrel in those days. And I arrived in, and I said, evening, Michael. No reply. Wouldn't salute me or anything. And I said, what's wrong? It's finished. And I went down on my knees, and Anne, his wife, was with him, and I said, Michael, is it curtains for us? I probably shouldn't have said it, but Anne started laughing, everybody started laughing, and but Michael didn't.
I remember Joe Malone talking about the Stony Thursday Book,
Yeah.
and he called it the Stony Broke Book.
That's essentially what it was, yeah.
We did manage to put a great business plan together when we brought out the pebble broadsheet.
Yeah, we thought the pebble would rescue the stone. We got that wrong as well.
We got the pebble broadsheet printed out in Salesian Press in Pallaskenry, and we came into town one Friday night with our rolled up broadsheets. So we hit the White House, we hit Tom Collins, we hit a lot of what we thought south, what we thought were the literary pubs to try and sell them. And we sold one here and there. But then we were passing up by Charlie St. George's,
yeah.
and we said we'll try it, sure, look, we've nothing to lose. So we went in, and the first chap took one off us, and he said, are these all the new ballads, boys? And we said they are. And everyone in the pub bought one, so we were in heaven after that.
The curious thing about the pebble was we got the paper from Shannon, a company that made handmade paper. Had processed handmade paper, which was really good. And if you have a copy, do you? I've got a copy still.
How many copies did you publish?
Was it 100?
Get 50.
100.
Yeah, but how many editions, should I say? How many? Did it only come out
It
once?
only came out twice. I think we did two.
Two.
Yeah.
Yeah. And how many eventually of the Stony Thursday Book did you get together?
Here in Limerick we did 8.
8.
Madrid 2. And then it went into a little bit of silence, and then along came Mark Whelan, and he kept it going, and he moved it into a kind of a more economical footing with Kushla, the Arts Council. And Mark, I have to, I'd like to pay a tribute to Mark for the work he put into that. And I asked Mark years later, I was editing an Irish section of a magazine that was coming out from Tianjin, place I mentioned in the poem, in China. And I asked Mark for a poem, and this is actually what the poem he sent me, and it was his last published poem. And I'd like to read it in his honour and recognition for the work he put into keeping Stony going. My death. So much to be left behind when you leave. No more remembering towards what is past, no more promise of tomorrow. My dead waits stunned by the cobweb tears and the mingling of unknown sorrows, flowing in the pipes of my veins. Bare and naked, I no longer matter to footprints left in the echo of crunching snow. There is a song to be sung to break the windows of light and to have nothing more to do with time. It rests at the bottom of a river where above the lowest walk across bridges, their shadows blocking out the light of the sun. And that was the last published poem published by Mark.
Right.
But we remember him here tonight along with Joe. And,
I think Jim has got some news about the next Stony Thursday Book, or the 50th anniversary Stony Thursday Book, which will be published in 2025. Do you want to sit down?
Next year in 2025, it'll be 50 years since 1975 when we got the Stony Thursday on the road. And I was speaking with Etienne McCooey today, the arts officer, and she has kindly asked John and I to edit it for the 50th anniversary. So that's good.
So
Does anybody want to ask a question?
Både när de var veckostan där att vår delkötten till er. Jag ser inte kan vara det. Jag ser starka krogar. Harvekrogar. Harvekrogar. Vertedi. Jag ser inte kagas. En Bertchen är Bert Interfi. Bert Interfi.
Okay, does anybody else want to ask the lads anything?
No, I just want to say thank you so much. That was so lovely. I always think I find poetry difficult to read, but I always love listening to it.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I think it really jumps off the page. I think it's a very performative art form. People, I think, look at his page, but I think it's a performative art form. And I also want to say I'm looking forward to working with Ian from the Arts Office, and it's such a privilege to be working on the Stony Thursday still, and knowing how important it is for poets to be able to get their work out there and for it to be able to spread. So we have this year's edition hopefully kind of in November, and then the three of us will we'll get together and work on 2025. Yeah.
Yes. I think the Stony always had a Limerick character, especially the early ones there. And let's hope that the lads can bring that heart back into it again.
It'll be difficult to repeat what we were doing there because, as Jim pointed out, Michael Curtin did 3 and we had to go elsewhere, and then Dalton's did another one, and then McKern's did another one, and each house, as you know, has their own house style, and that's one reason why they're all different. But we went with the difference, and there's a different cover. And one thing I should say, we were blessed with access to artists in the art school, and we had the best of artists to do illustrations and work like that, and we've actually gone back to doing that, I think, with Ashley, who's provided a wonderful cover here. Ashley Burke was there, and this was a great, for me personally, it was a wonderful collaboration to try and go for an authentic cover done by an artist living and working here, which reminds me of sort of the early covers of the Stony. You know. Baby. John Blow Flaherty. No, we make leg down to Paddy Bush, Clifton. Chocolate good.